Subscribe to my YouTube channel for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. Margaret had always prided herself on keeping family harmony intact, but sometimes the very threads that bind us together can unravel in the most unexpected ways. What started as an ordinary Tuesday morning would become the day that changed everything she thought she knew about her daughter's marriage, and about herself. The autumn rain drummed against the kitchen window as Margaret finished her morning coffee, watching the drops race down the glass like tears she couldn't shed. At 52, she had learned to find comfort in routine, in the predictable rhythm of days that stretched ahead without surprise. Her daughter Emma had moved out 3 years ago, married to David, and the house felt too quiet now, too full of echoes. When her phone buzzed with Emma's text message, Margaret felt a familiar flutter of maternal concern. "Mum, can you pick up my prescription? I'm stuck at work and David's car is in the shop. He can drive you if that's okay." Margaret stared at the message longer than necessary. David, her son-in-law, with the easy smile and careful politeness that never quite reached his eyes. Something about him had always made her uneasy, though she could never put her finger on what exactly. Emma seemed happy enough, but there were shadows in her daughter's laughter these days, a brittleness that worried Margaret in the quiet hours before. "Dawn, of course, sweetheart," she typed back, then immediately regretted the eagerness in her response. 20 minutes later, David's silver sedan pulled into her driveway. Margaret grabbed her purse and coat, steeling herself for what she assumed would be an awkward but brief trip to the pharmacy. She had no idea that the next hour would shatter her carefully constructed world. David smiled as she settled into the passenger seat. But there was something different about him today. His usual reserved demeanor seemed to have cracked, revealing something underneath that made Margaret's pulse quicken with unease. "Thanks for helping out," he said, his voice carrying an odd weight. "Emma's been so stressed lately. Work's been brutal for her." Margaret nodded, adjusting her seatbelt. "She does seem tired when I talk to her." "Marriage is an adjustment, I suppose." "Is it?" David's question hung in the air as he pulled out of the driveway. "Sometimes I wonder if some people are just meant to be alone." The comment struck Margaret as strange, but she chose to interpret it charitably. Everyone feels that way sometimes. The important thing is working through it together. David was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel with unnecessary force. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, more intimate than it had any right to be. "You know, Margaret, I've always wondered what Emma will look like when she's your age." The words sent an uncomfortable chill down Margaret's spine. There was something in his tone that made the innocent comment feel anything but innocent. She turned to look at him, trying to read his expression, but his eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. "She's beautiful now, and she'd be beautiful then," Margaret replied carefully, unsure why she felt the need to defend her daughter. "Is beautiful," David agreed, and then added words that made Margaret's blood run cold. "But beauty fades, doesn't it? Unless you know how to preserve it. Unless you know how to appreciate it properly." The pharmacy was only 10 minutes away, but suddenly the distance felt infinite. Margaret found herself studying David's profile, noticing things she had never paid attention to before. The way his jaw tightened when he spoke about Emma. The calculated casualness of his posture. The fact that he had taken a route to the pharmacy that she didn't recognize. "This isn't the way to Riverside Pharmacy," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought we'd go to the one across town. Better parking." David's explanation was smooth, practiced, but Margaret noticed he didn't look at her when he said it. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. Margaret felt trapped, Not just in the car, but in a situation she couldn't quite name or understand. Her instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but she couldn't identify what exactly. "You know what I love about you, Margaret?" David's voice broke the silence with an intimacy that made her skin crawl. "You're so perceptive. I bet you see things that other people miss." "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you are." He glanced at her then, and Margaret saw something in his eyes that made her heart race with fear. "I think you know exactly what I mean." The car slowed as they approached the red light, and Margaret's hand instinctively moved toward the door handle. David noticed the movement and smiled, an expression that was both charming and predatory. "Relax, Margaret. We're just having a conversation." But Margaret knew they weren't just having a conversation. This was something else entirely. Something that made her feel like prey being circled by a predator. She thought of Emma, her bright, trusting daughter who had no idea what kind of man she had married. "Emma loves you very much," Margaret said, testing the waters, hoping to remind David of his obligations, his commitments. "Does she?" David's laugh was bitter. "Sometimes I think Emma loves the idea of being married more than she loves me. She's so focused on creating the perfect life, the perfect image, that she's forgotten about the person she's supposed to be building it with." Margaret felt a surge of protective anger. "Emma is a wonderful woman. If you can't see that, then perhaps you don't deserve her." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and the moment they left her lips, she knew she had made a mistake. David's expression darkened, and when he looked at her this time, there was no pretense of civility left. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't deserve her. But here's the thing, Margaret, I don't want her anymore." The confession hung in the air between them like a poisonous cloud. Margaret felt the world shift around her. Everything she thought. She knew about her daughter's marriage crumbling in real time. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Emma is beautiful and kind, and everything a man should want in a wife. But she's not what I want." David's voice dropped to barely above her whisper. "She's not who I want." Margaret's heart pounded so hard she was sure David could hear it. The implications of his words crashed over her like a tidal wave, and she struggled to process what he was telling her. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do." David pulled into the parking lot of a small coffee shop, not the pharmacy at all. He turned off the engine and turned to face her fully. "You understand perfectly." Margaret's hand was on the door handle now, but David reached out and gently placed his hand over hers. His touch was warm, familiar in a way that made her feel sick. "I've been married to Emma for 3 years," he continued, his voice hypnotic, in its quiet intensity. 3 years of pretending to be happy, of trying to convince myself that I married the right woman. But I didn't, did I, Margaret? You need to take me home. Now." "I married the wrong woman," David said, ignoring her demand. "I married the daughter when I should have waited for the mother." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She jerked her hand away from his and scrambled for the door handle, but David was faster. He reached across her and held the door closed, trapping her in the car with him. "Let me out," she demanded, but her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Not until you hear me out," David said, his face inches from hers. "Not until you understand what you've done to me." Margaret pressed herself against the passenger door, trying to create distance between them. "I haven't done anything to you. Haven't you?" David's smile was sad and bitter. "Every family dinner, every holiday, every time you walked into a room wearing that perfume that drives me crazy. Every time you laughed at my jokes, every time you looked at me like you actually saw me. You've been torturing me for 3 years, Margaret, and I don't think you even know it." The accusation was so absurd, so twisted, that Margaret almost laughed. Instead, she felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "You're married to my daughter." "I know." David's voice broke slightly. "Don't you think I know that? Don't you think I've tried to stop feeling this way? But I can't, Margaret. I can't stop thinking about you. Dreaming about you, wanting you." Margaret closed her eyes, trying to block out his words, but they kept coming. "Emma looks like you. Did you know that? Sometimes, when the light hits her just right, I can pretend. It's you. But it's not enough anymore. The pretending isn't enough." "Stop," Margaret whispered. "Please stop." "I can't stop," David said, his voice desperate now. "I've tried everything. I've tried to be a good husband, tried to love Emma the way she deserves to be loved. But how can I love her when every time I look at her, I wish she was you?" Margaret opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the pain and desperation written across his features. It didn't make what he was saying any less wrong, but it made it somehow more tragic. "This isn't love," she said quietly. "This is obsession. It's unhealthy, and it's destroying your marriage. My marriage was destroyed the moment I met you." David replied, "The moment I shook your hand at Emma's college graduation and felt something I had never felt before. I knew then that I was making a mistake, but I was already too deep. Emma was so happy, so excited about our future. How could I break her heart? So instead you're breaking mine," Margaret said, the words coming out more honestly than she intended. David's expression softened. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to know that you're loved, even if it's in a way that can never be." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face now, but she wasn't sure if they were tears of sadness, anger, or something else entirely. "You can't love me, David. I'm your wife's mother. I'm 20 years older than you. This is wrong on every level. Age is just a number," David said, reaching out to touch her cheek. "And as for Emma—" "Don't," Margaret interrupted, jerking away from his touch. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." David's hand fell to his lap, and for a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of his confession settling between them like a physical presence. "What do you want from me?" Margaret finally asked. "I want you to tell me that you feel something too," David said quietly. "I want you to tell me that I'm not crazy, that there's something between us." Margaret stared at him, this man who had just shattered her world with his impossible confession. The terrible truth was that she had felt something, hadn't she? Those moments when their eyes met across the dinner table, when his hand brushed hers as he passed her a dish, when he laughed at her stories with genuine warmth. There had been something there, something she had pushed down and refused to acknowledge. But acknowledging it now would be catastrophic. It would destroy Emma's marriage, shatter her daughter's trust, and ruin everything Margaret had worked to build. "No," she said firmly. "There's nothing between us. There can't be anything between us." David's face crumpled with disappointment, but he nodded slowly. "I understand. I had to try. But I understand." He started the car again, and they drove to the pharmacy in silence. Margaret got Emma's prescription, her hands shaking as she paid the pharmacist. When she got back to the car, David was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched with barely contained emotion. The drive back to Margaret's house was the longest 20 minutes of her life. Neither of them spoke, but the air between them was thick with unspoken words, unresolved tension, and the weight of secrets that would change everything. When David pulled into her driveway, Margaret reached for the door handle immediately, but his voice stopped her. "Margaret." She turned back to him reluctantly. "I'm sorry," he said, and she could see that he meant it. "I'm sorry for putting you in this position, for making you carry this burden. But I'm not sorry for loving you. I can't be sorry for that. Margaret felt fresh tears threatening to fall. What are you going to do? I don't know, David admitted. I honestly don't know. But I can't keep living this lie. Emma deserves better than a husband who wishes she was someone else. The implication of his words hit Margaret like a thunderbolt. You're going to leave her? I think I have to, David said quietly. I think it's the only fair thing to do. Margaret's protective instincts flared. You can't do that to her. She loves you. She's building a life with you. A life built on a lie, David pointed out. Is that really what you want for your daughter? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered and unanswerable. Margaret got out of the car without another word, but she could feel David's eyes on her as she walked to her front door. Inside her house, Margaret sat on her couch and stared at the prescription bottle in her hands. Such a small thing, but it had triggered a conversation that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She thought about David's words, about the pain in his voice, about the impossible situation they were all trapped in. But mostly, she thought about Emma, her beautiful, trusting daughter who had no idea that her marriage was built on a foundation of sand, who had no idea that her husband had just confessed his love for her mother in a coffee shop parking lot. Margaret picked up her phone to call Emma, to warn her somehow. But what could she say? How could she explain what had happened without destroying everything? Instead, she set the phone down and walked to her kitchen window, the same window where she had watched the rain that morning. The sun was shining now, but Margaret felt colder than she had in years. David's words echoed in her mind. I married the wrong woman. I married the daughter when I should have waited for the mother. The words were wrong, twisted, inappropriate, in every way, but they had been spoken with such raw honesty, such desperate sincerity, that Margaret couldn't simply dismiss them as the ravings of a confused man. She thought about her own life, about the loneliness that had settled over her, like a shroud since Emma moved out, about the quiet desperation of middle age, the feeling that her best years were behind her, about the way David had looked at her, not as Emma's mother, or as a woman past her prime, but as someone desirable, someone worth loving. It was wrong to think these things. It was wrong to feel flattered by his confession, wrong to feel anything but disgust and anger. But human hearts don't always follow the rules of propriety, and Margaret found herself trapped in a web of conflicting emotions that she couldn't untangle. The phone rang, startling her from her reverie. It was Emma. Hi, Mom. Did you get my prescription? Margaret's throat felt tight. Yes, sweetheart, I have it. Great. David said he'd drop it by tonight after work. Is that okay? The thought of seeing David again so soon made Margaret's stomach churn. Actually, I can bring it to you. I don't mind. You sure? David said he didn't mind. I'm sure, Margaret said quickly. I'll be over in an hour. Okay, thanks, Mom. You're the best. Margaret hung up the phone and closed her eyes. She had to see Emma, had to look at her daughter and remember why David's confession could never be anything more than a terrible mistake. She had to find a way to protect her daughter from the truth, even if it meant carrying the burden of David's words for the rest of her life. But as she got ready to leave, Margaret caught sight of herself in the mirror. For just a moment, she saw what David saw, not a middle-aged woman past her prime, but someone still beautiful, still capable of inspiring passion and desire. The thought terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. An hour later, Margaret stood on Emma's doorstep, the prescription bottle in her trembling hand. When Emma opened the door, her face lit up with genuine joy. Mum, you didn't have to drive all the way over here. Margaret studied her daughter's face, looking for signs of unhappiness. for cracks in the facade of marital bliss. But Emma looked radiant, healthy, content with her life. "I wanted to see you," Margaret said, and realized it was true. She needed to see Emma, needed to remind herself of what was at stake. They sat in Emma's living room, drinking tea and talking about trivial things. Margaret found herself studying the photographs on the mantel, Emma and David's wedding pictures, vacation photos, moments of happiness captured in time. In every photo, David was smiling, his arm around Emma, looking like the perfect husband. But now Margaret knew the truth behind those smiles. She knew that David had been living a lie, pretending to be happy while his heart belonged to someone else. The knowledge made her feel complicit in the deception, even though she had done nothing wrong. "Mum, are you okay?" Emma's voice broke through her thoughts. "You seem distracted." Margaret forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." "You should take better care of yourself," Emma said with concern. "You work too hard. Maybe you should start dating again. It's been 5 years since Dad died. Don't you think it's time?" The suggestion hit Margaret like a physical blow. Dating. The idea seemed absurd after David's confession, after learning that she was capable of inspiring such inappropriate feelings. How could she trust herself around other men? How could she trust them around her? "I'm not ready for that," Margaret said quickly. "You might never feel ready," Emma pointed out gently. "But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. You're still young, Mom. You have so much love to give." Margaret almost laughed at the irony. If only Emma knew how much love her mother had apparently inspired, and from whom. "I'm happy with my life as it is," Margaret lied. Emma looked skeptical but didn't push the issue. They talked for another hour about work, about Emma's plans for the holidays, about everything except the elephant in the room that only Margaret could see. When Margaret finally left, Emma hugged her tightly at the door. "I love you, Mom. You know that, right?" "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." As Margaret drove home, she thought about David's words again. He had asked her to tell him that she felt something too, that he wasn't crazy. She had denied it, that the truth was more complicated than that. She did feel something. Not love, exactly, but something. A recognition perhaps of the loneliness that drove people to desperate measures. An understanding of the way desire can twist and corrupt even the most well-intentioned hearts. But feeling something and acting on it were two different things entirely. Margaret had made her choice in that coffee shop parking lot, and she would live with the consequences. She would carry David's secret, protect Emma from the truth, and hope that somehow, some way, they could all find a path forward that didn't involve destroying the people they claimed to love. But as she pulled into her driveway, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. David's confession had opened a door that couldn't be closed, had spoken truths that couldn't be unspoken. The simple ride to the pharmacy had indeed taken a dark turn, and Margaret feared that the road ahead would be darker still. She sat in her car for a long time, staring at her house, thinking about the choice she had made, and the choices that lay ahead. David's words still haunted her, would always haunt her. A reminder of the complicated, messy, sometimes terrible ways that human hearts can betray the people they care about most. In the end, Margaret knew that real love meant making the hard choices, carrying the difficult burdens, and sometimes accepting that the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. She had chosen to protect Emma, to preserve her daughter's happiness even at the cost of her own peace of mind. But she also knew that this was far from over. David's confession had changed everything, and sooner or later, the truth would demand its due. The only question was whether Margaret would be strong enough to face whatever came next, and whether the love she bore for her daughter would be enough to see them all through the storm that was surely coming. The autumn evening was growing cold, and Margaret finally got out of her car and went inside. But even as she closed the door behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had left something important behind in that coffee shop packing. Perhaps her innocence, perhaps her peace of mind, or perhaps just the simple pleasure of believing that some secrets were better left unspoken. David's words would haunt her, just as he had promised. But Margaret was determined that they would haunt her alone, that she would carry this burden so that Emma could continue to live in the light, unburdened by the darkness that had touched her mother's life on what should have been a simple ride to the store.